Rain fell softly against the kitchen window as Daniel sat alone, staring at the cold dinner he had made hours ago. The lights were dim, the clock ticked steadily, and the smell of pasta had long faded from the air. He looked at his phone again. No message, no call. It was almost 11, and Emily still hadn't come home. He used to wait for her with excitement, counting the minutes until she walked through the door. But lately, waiting had become a quiet routine filled with doubt. Their marriage had once been warm, full of small joys and laughter that filled every corner of the house. They used to dance while cooking, talk about everything, and make plans that seemed endless. But now, Daniel could barely remember the last time she smiled at him like she used to. She said work was stressful, that she was tired, that she needed space. He believed her at first. Then came the late nights, unanswered texts, and vague excuses that didn't sound right anymore. He tried to ignore the growing ache in his chest, convincing himself that love sometimes just needed patience. He thought maybe if he stayed calm and understanding, things would get better. But sitting there in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by memories that no longer felt alive, Daniel began to wonder if patience was just another word for denial. At exactly 10:47 p.m., the sound of the front door opening made him flinch. His heart leapt. She was finally home. He stood up quickly, brushing his hands on his jeans, rehearsing in his head what he wanted to say. He planned to tell her that he missed her, that they needed to talk, that he still believed in them. But all his thoughts stopped when he saw her. Emily stepped into the hallway, shaking the rain from her coat. Her hair was slightly wet, strands sticking to her face. She looked surprised to see the light still on. And then Daniel saw him. A tall man followed her in, holding an umbrella. He smiled politely, his presence filling the small entryway. He looked too comfortable to be a stranger. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His stomach tightened as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. For a second, no one spoke. The only sound was the rain outside, steady and cold. Emily glanced at Daniel, her expression nervous, like she'd been caught in something she couldn't explain. "Daniel," she said finally, her voice soft, "I didn't think you'd still be awake." He tried to speak, but his voice came out thin. "I was waiting for you." The man beside her gave a small nod, his smile awkward. "Sorry for the late hour. The rain's terrible out there." Emily stepped forward quickly, as if trying to explain. "This is Michael," she said. "He's from work. His car broke down near the office, and I offered him a ride home. It's been pouring all evening." Daniel forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I see. That was kind of you." He didn't want to make a scene. Not now, not in front of a stranger. But something about the way Michael stood near her, the ease in his posture, the quiet way she looked at him, felt wrong. There was a kind of familiarity there that shouldn't have been. Still, Daniel stayed polite. He had always been that way, come under pressure, even when his heart was cracking inside. "You both must be cold," he said quietly. "Let me make some coffee." He turned toward the kitchen, needing to move, to do something. His hands trembled slightly as he poured water into the kettle. He could hear their voices in the living room, low and soft. Emily laughed once, just a quick sound, but it hit Daniel like a punch. That laugh used to belong to him. It was the sound he fell in love with years ago. He carried the mugs back to the living room, forcing his breathing to steady. When he entered, they both looked up. Michael thanked him for the coffee, taking it with a smile. Emily avoided his eyes. She sat on the couch, close enough to the stranger that Daniel noticed. He sat across from them, his eyes moving between the two. "Rough night, huh?" he said lightly. "Yeah," Michael replied. "Long day at work, then the car trouble. Emily saved me, honestly." Emily smiled faintly. "It's nothing." Daniel nodded. "She's always been helpful like that." His tone was gentle, but the words carried weight. The conversation stayed small, about weather, work, traffic. Nothing meaningful, but every sentence felt heavy. Daniel's mind was spinning, but his face stayed calm. He studied his wife as she spoke, her tired eyes, her fidgeting hands. There was something unspoken in her silence, something fragile. When Michael finally stood to leave, Daniel walked him to the door. "Thanks again," Michael said. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced." No problem, Daniel replied evenly. Drive safe. Soon as the door closed, the house went still. Emily stood by the couch holding her empty coffee mug, eyes fixed on the floor. Daniel watched her for a moment. He wanted to ask the question burning inside him, who is he really? But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he spoke softly. You didn't call. She looked up, guilt flickering in her eyes. I'm sorry. Everything happened fast. I didn't think you'd still be up. I always wait for you, he said quietly. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. The silence between them stretched long and heavy, filled with everything they hadn't said in months. Daniel turned away, picking up the half-empty mugs and setting them on the counter. He didn't look back. Emily stood there for a while, uncertain, then walked slowly toward their bedroom. Her footsteps faded down the hall, leaving Daniel alone in the dim light of the kitchen. He looked at the clock. Kenny, 11:32 p.m., the same house. The same rain, but nothing felt the same anymore. He sat back down at the table, staring at the chair across from him, the one she used to fill with laughter, stories, and warmth. The dinner had gone cold long ago, but he didn't move it. He just sat there, listening to the sound of the rain and wondering how love could fade so quietly. Without a fight, without a goodbye. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. Inside, Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Something inside him whispered that this night had changed everything, and though he didn't know how or why, he knew that the woman who had just walked through that door, his wife, was no longer the same one he'd fallen in love with. Still, a part of him wasn't ready to let go, not yet. The rain outside grew louder as the night pressed on, drumming against the windows like a restless heartbeat. Daniel stood by the counter, his mind racing. The smell of fresh coffee rising between him and the silence that had settled again. In the living room, Emily sat beside the man she called Michael, talking in quiet tones. Their words were soft, polite to politen, yet every sound carried meaning Daniel couldn't ignore. He tried to stay calm. He told himself it was nothing, that he shouldn't assume the worst. But something inside him felt off, like a puzzle missing the final piece. He picked up the tray with 3 mugs and walked toward them. When he stepped into the room, both of them looked up. Coffee's ready, he said, his voice steady. Michael smiled. A little too warmly. Thanks, man. You didn't have to. Daniel forced a polite nod. It's no trouble. He handed Emily her cup. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and he felt how cold her hands were. She didn't meet his eyes. That small gesture, that quiet avoidance, said more than any words could. Michael began talking about his broken car, how it had stalled near the office after the rain started. He spoke quickly, trying to fill the air with anything that wasn't uncomfortable. Daniel listened, nodding occasionally, though most of the words went past him. He wasn't listening to what Michael said. He was listening to how Emily reacted. She smiled at the right moments, laughed softly once or twice. It was a sound Daniel hadn't heard from her in weeks. Must have been tough out there. Daniel said finally. Yeah, Michael replied, sipping his coffee. Emily offered to help. She really saved the night. Daniel turned to his wife. She's always been kind, he said quietly. Emily gave a small, uncertain smile. It wasn't a big deal. But to Daniel, it was. Because she looked at the man beside her differently, like she'd already built a small world of trust between them. A world Daniel hadn't been invited into. The room felt smaller with every passing second. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder. Daniel sat across from them, pretending to relax, but his chest felt heavy. He wanted to ask questions, how long they'd known each other. Why she never mentioned him, but he knew that tone could turn the night into a storm. He didn't want to be angry. He just wanted to understand where he stood. So Daniel said, breaking the silence, "You two work together often." Michael nodded. "Pretty often, yeah? She's great at her job. Always stays late to help everyone else." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew Emily stayed late at work, but he hadn't known who she was staying with. Emily shifted in her seat, her voice gentle. "Michael, you should probably go before the rain gets worse." Yeah, I should, Michael agreed, checking his phone. Thank you both for the coffee. He stood, giving Daniel a quick nod. Sorry again for showing up so late. No problem, Daniel replied. Drive safe. When the door closed behind him, the quiet that followed felt deafening. The house seemed larger now, emptier. Emily stood near the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, as if she wasn't sure whether to go or stay. Daniel turned back toward her. So, he said, trying to sound casual, you gave him a ride. Yes, she said softly. His car broke down. It was raining hard and I couldn't just leave him there. He nodded. Of course not. The air between them was thick. Emily finally looked up, her eyes uncertain. Daniel, please don't misunderstand. He's just a coworker. Daniel's voice was calm but tired. I didn't say otherwise, but you're thinking it, she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth hung between them, his doubt, her guilt, their growing distance. It wasn't about the man who had just left. It was about the space that had formed long before that night. Emily sighed and sat on the edge of the couch. I know I've been distant lately. I don't know how to fix it. Everything feels heavy work. Life. Daniel sat across from her, hands clasped tightly. Then talk to me, Emily. Don't just shut me out. She looked at him, her expression breaking a little. I don't mean to, I just don't know what to say anymore. Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to reach for her hand to remind her that love didn't just disappear overnight. But he also knew that words wouldn't fix what time had slowly broken. They had both been living beside each other, not with each other, for too long. The rain softened outside, turning to a gentle drizzle. The tension between them seemed to fade a little, replaced by quiet exhaustion. Emily rubbed her arms and said softly, You should go to bed. It's late. Not tired, he said. She hesitated, then nodded. Good night, Daniel. He watched her walk down the hallway toward their bedroom. The door didn't close completely, it stayed slightly open, like a half-drawn curtain between two worlds. Daniel sat there alone, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards. His eyes wandered to the umbrella Michael had left by the door. It leaned against the wall, dripping water onto the wooden floor. Something about that small detail hurt more than it should have. It was proof that another man had been in his home, standing beside his wife. Sharing a moment that Daniel wasn't part of, he took a deep breath and picked up the umbrella. Setting it by the front door, maybe Michael would come for it. Tomorrow, maybe he wouldn't. Either way, Daniel knew tonight had changed something between him and Emily. He walked to the window and looked outside. The streetlights glowed softly through the mist, and he could see two sets of footprints leading from the driveway to the porch. They were close together, too close. His heart sank again. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his thoughts. He wasn't angry, just lost. He wanted to believe in her, to trust her, but trust didn't grow easily once cracks had formed. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself. She said, he's just a coworker. But the words didn't comfort him. They only echoed in his mind, sounding weaker each time. He turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom. Emily was already lying down, facing away from him. The soft rise and fall of her breathing told him she was awake but pretending to sleep. He stood by the doorway for a moment, watching her. So close, yet miles away. He lay down on his side of the bed. The distance between them felt like a river, silent but deep. He stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. Outside, the rain stopped completely. The world grew quiet again, as if holding its breath. Daniel knew tomorrow would come, and they would both act as if nothing had happened. But he also knew that something had shifted forever. The man who walked in tonight wasn't just a stranger, he was a mirror, showing Daniel everything that had gone wrong between him and the woman he still loved. And though the night had ended, the storm inside Daniel had only just begun. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains, spreading softly across the quiet room. Daniel woke early, though he hadn't really slept. His mind had been full all night. Flashes of Emily's face, the stranger's voice, the space that had grown between them. He turned his head slightly. Emily was still beside him, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. He could tell by the way she breathed, slow but not steady. They both lay there, silent, waiting for the other to speak first. After a few minutes, Daniel got up, pulled on a shirt, and went to the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, bringing a kind of comfort that didn't last long. He sat down with the cup in his hands, staring at the steam rising and fading, thinking how much their love felt the same warm for a while, then gone before he noticed, when Emily finally came in. She looked tired, her hair tied back loosely, wearing one of his old shirts. She stood by the counter, not speaking, just watching him. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument could have been. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was soft, unsure. He gestured to the other cup. "Made you coffee?" She nodded, took it, and sat across from him. For a few moments, they both just sipped in silence. Then, as if the words had been waiting too long, Daniel finally spoke. "We can't keep doing this, Emily." She looked down at her cup. "I know. I need to understand what's happening. Last night, that man Michael," she said quickly. "He's just a friend." Daniel's eyes didn't move from hers. Then why did it feel like more? Emily sighed and set the cup down. "Because everything between us already feels broken. Because you look at me like I'm a stranger, and maybe I've started to feel like one." Her words hit hard, but she wasn't angry. She was honest. Daniel leaned back, trying to absorb them. "I never stopped trying, Emily. I've been waiting for you to come back to me. But you've been gone for months, not physically, but here." He touched his chest. "I can't reach you anymore." She looked at him, her eyes wet but calm. "I know, and I hate that. I hate what we've become." "Then tell me what changed," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Emily took a deep breath. "I don't know when it happened. One day, I just stopped feeling like we were a team. I'd come home and it felt like we were just living next to each other, not with each other. You'd ask about my day, I'd say it was fine, and we'd sit there pretending everything was okay. But it wasn't." Daniel stared at her, remembering all those evenings, quiet dinners, short answers, tired smiles. He thought he was giving her space. He didn't realize that silence was pulling them apart. "I thought work was the problem," she continued. "But even when I was home, something felt missing. Michael just listened. He made me feel seen again. It wasn't about him, Daniel. It was about me feeling invisible here." Her words were gentle, but they cut deep. Daniel lowered his eyes. "So that's it? You found someone to talk to because I stopped seeing you." "It's not that simple," she said softly. "I didn't plan it. I didn't even realize it was happening. But yes, maybe I needed something I wasn't getting here." Daniel stood, restless, running a hand through his hair. "I was trying, Emily. Maybe not perfectly, but I thought love was enough." "I know you did," she whispered. "And I love you, Daniel. That hasn't disappeared. But love isn't always enough when two people stop meeting halfway." He sat back down slowly, his anger melting into sadness. "So what now?" She hesitated, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't know how to fix this." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The coffee had gone cold. The sound of rain had returned faintly outside, gentle this time, like a background to their pain. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "Do you want to try again?" Emily looked up, surprised. "Try again." He nodded. "I don't want to let what we had disappear. We built too much together to just walk away." Tears filled her eyes. "What if it's too late?" "It's not," he said softly. "Not if we still care enough to ask that question." She covered her face with her hands, letting out a shaky breath. Daniel reached across the table, his hand hesitating before touching hers. When she didn't pull away, he held on. "I'm not asking for promises," he said gently. "Just a chance to find our way back. I miss us." Emily looked up at him, her expression raw and tired, but something in her eyes softened. "I miss us too," she whispered. "For the first time in months." There was a flicker of connection, fragile, uncertain, but real. They sat like that for a while, holding hands in silence. No grand speeches, no perfect ending. Just two broken hearts quietly deciding not to give up yet. After breakfast, Emily stood by the window, staring out at the rain. "You know," she said, "when Michael called me yesterday, I didn't plan to bring him here. I just didn't know how to say no." Daniel nodded slowly. "You don't have to explain? I think I understand now." She turned to him, her face soft. "I never crossed a line, Daniel. I swear." He believed her. Deep down, he always had. The real betrayal wasn't about another man. It was about how far apart they had let themselves drift. He walked up beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Then let's start over. Not pretend nothing happened, but rebuild from it. Honest this time." Emily smiled faintly through her tears. "You really still believe in us?" He looked at her, his voice firm. "I do." They stood there for a while, watching the rain blur the city outside. It wasn't a moment of magic or sudden healing, but something had changed. The walls between them had cracked just enough for light to get in. Later that night, they sat together on the couch, not saying much. The TV played softly, but neither of them paid attention. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, a simple gesture, yet it felt like the first real sign of closeness in a long time. Daniel didn't speak. He just rested his hand on hers, afraid that saying anything might break the fragile peace between them. When she finally whispered, "I don't want to lose this," Daniel closed his eyes and replied, "Then we won't." It wasn't a promise carved in stone, but it was enough, a beginning after too many endings. As the night deepened, the rain stopped completely, and a cool wind brushed through the open window. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel so empty inside that small moment of quiet hope. Daniel realized something. Love doesn't always stay perfect, but sometimes broken pieces can still fit together if both people care enough to hold on. And as he looked at Emily beside him, he knew this was their chance to start again. Not from where they left off, but from where they truly began. The next morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt new. The sky was clear for the first time in days, and sunlight slipped gently through the curtains. Daniel woke before Emily, lying still for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. It wasn't the uneasy silence they had shared before, was calm, peaceful. He got up quietly, brewed coffee, and looked out the kitchen window. The rain had washed everything clean outside. The air looked fresh, full of small beginnings. Emily came in a few minutes later, wearing his sweater again, her hair tied back carelessly. She looked tired but softer, as if the weight she carried yesterday had lifted just a little. "Smells good," she said, taking a seat at the table. Daniel poured her a cup and sat across from her. "Morning, morning." Neither spoke for a while, but the silence felt different. No gentle, not sharp. Finally, Emily set her cup down and looked at him. "I told Michael I can't see him anymore," she said simply. "Not outside work. Not while I still have something here worth saving." Daniel looked at her, trying to read her expression. There was no guilt this time. No hesitation, just honesty. "Do you really think we can fix this?" he asked quietly. She gave a small, sad smile. "I don't know, but I want to try. If you still want to." "I do," he said without hesitation. They sat in silence again. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they both needed time to feel what that meant. For the first time in months, there was no anger. No pretense, only to people finally facing the truth together. The day passed slowly but peacefully. Daniel stayed home from work, and Emily took the day off too. They cleaned the house together, something they hadn't done side by side in ages. It wasn't romantic or dramatic, just quiet teamwork. As they moved through the rooms, they found small reminders of their life together. Old photos tucked in drawers, tickets from their first concert, a note Emily once left him on his birthday. When Daniel found the note, folded neatly inside a book, he read it silently. It said, "No matter what happens, we'll always find our way back." He looked at Emily, holding the paper between his fingers. You remember this? She smiled faintly. I meant it then, and now. She met his eyes. I still mean it. I just forgot for a while. He nodded, tucking the note back in the book. Then maybe this is our way back. In the evening, they made dinner together. It wasn't perfect. The pasta was overcooked and Emily spilled sauce on the counter, but they laughed about it. For Daniel, that laugh was everything. It felt real again, not forced or polite. After dinner, they went for a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, the ground still damp from last night's rain. They didn't hold hands at first, but after a few minutes, Emily's fingers brushed his and she didn't pull away. They walked in silence, side by side, listening to the sound of their footsteps. Do you ever think about when we first met? She asked softly. All the time, he said. You spilled coffee on me, she laughed, and you got angry. I wasn't angry, he smiled, just pretending to be. That day feels like forever ago, she said quietly. It does, Daniel replied, but it's still ours. They stopped by the park, sitting on a bench under a tree. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the faint sound of music drifted from somewhere far away. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, something she hadn't done in a long time. I thought we lost it, she whispered. All of it. Daniel's voice was steady. Love doesn't disappear. It just hides sometimes. You have to want to find it again. She looked up at him. And you still want to? I never stopped, he said simply. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. It wasn't the smile of someone who has healed, it was the smile of someone who finally believed healing was possible. When they returned home, the sky had turned deep blue, stars faintly showing between thin clouds. Emily lit a candle in the living room, the soft glow wrapping the room in warmth. They sat together on the couch, not watching TV, not talking much, just sitting close. After a while, she said, Do you ever wonder why people stop fighting for what matters? Because fighting is hard, he answered. And sometimes people think leaving will hurt less. But it never does. She nodded slowly. You're right. It doesn't. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Then let's promise each other something. What? That next time it gets hard, we talk. No silence, no pretending. We face it together. Emily nodded, her voice soft. Deal? They stayed up late, talking about simple things, their first home, the road trips they never took, the silly arguments they used to have over pizza toppings. Every story brought a small piece of them back. It wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about remembering the reasons they had chosen each other in the first place. As the night grew quiet, Emily looked at him and said, That night when I came home with Michael, I was scared. Not because of you, but because I realized what I was risking. You, this, everything. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just took her hand and held it. Then maybe that fear saved us. She smiled. Softly. Maybe it did. The clock ticked toward midnight. The candle flickered low. Emily rested her head against his shoulder, whispering, I walked in that night thinking it was over. But maybe it was just the beginning of something new. Daniel's voice was low, gentle. Maybe it was the night we both finally woke up. They sat there until the candle went out, the room filled with quiet darkness. But it wasn't an empty kind of dark. It felt peaceful, safe. In the days that followed, they didn't fix everything overnight. There were still quiet moments, still long talks, still work to be done. But they began to rebuild slowly, honestly. They went to therapy together, started having dinner at the table again, and found comfort in small things. Morning walks, shared jokes, gentle touches. One evening, a few weeks later, it started raining again. Daniel and Emily stood by the window, watching the droplets run down the glass. It's funny, she said softly. The rain used to make me feel lonely. Now it feels different. Daniel smiled. That's because we're not standing apart this time. She turned toward him, eyes warm. No, she whispered. We're not. He wrapped his arm around her, and they watched the rain together, steady, calm and beautiful. Outside, the world shimmered under the soft light of street lamps. Inside, two hearts that had nearly drifted apart found their rhythm again. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. And sometimes that's what love truly is, not a fairy tale. Not a promise of forever, but a choice made over and over. To stay when it would be easier to leave. And as the rain kept falling, Daniel smiled quietly to himself, holding Emily close, knowing that this time, neither of them was alone.